Welcome back to another lesson with me, Mr. B. In this lesson, we're going to look at the artistic and cultural boom known as the Harlem Renaissance. For this lesson, we're going to look at the impact of the Harlem Renaissance and this idea of the double consciousness, building off of what we've already learned about how the consciousness works. So by definition, according to the anthology, the Harlem Renaissance has a lot of writing and art centered in Harlem, and it brought a new self-awareness and critical respect to literature in the United States, which this kind of ties to that double consciousness we'll get into in a moment. Harlem in general is a section of New York City, and at that time it attained a wholly black population of 150,000 people by the mid-1920s, which was huge. This became known as a city within a city, and this is where African Americans performed, they composed, they painted, and what gives it its name for this era as the Harlem Renaissance, because it was a huge boom in art, in music, from the African American community. Again, this is why that New York neighborhood became the center of the Harlem Renaissance. It sparked a creative boom of music, literature, and art amongst African American singers, musicians, and it helped the US achieve worldwide reputations, often much more highly regarded abroad than in the US. Just as we've seen with a lot of pop culture, there is Black or African American influence in almost every genre of music all over the world. Unfortunately, this movement came to an end in the 1930s when the Great Depression hit. An important way of thinking that came about from this is W.E.B. Du Bois' idea of double consciousness. Double consciousness is this idea that African Americans had to navigate their identities as Americans and as Blacks, as two different things. So why is this important? First of all, we just ended realism and naturalism, and African Americans have been freed from slavery for a few generations now. This means they had to begin navigating the ways that they thought about how they belonged, but also had to battle with the ideas of where they could be based off of the color of their skin, which is how we have this huge wave of racism and discrimination and separation of bathrooms and water fountains, parks, and housing. African Americans were and still are the group that paves the way for other BIPOC and marginalized groups to navigate these multiple identities. Do we belong as Americans? Do we belong as Asians? Do we belong as immigrants? Do we belong as Latinx or other communities? And these multiple layered identities go on, from being mixed race to part of the LGBTQ community to being an immigrant who grows up in America but wasn't American in the first place. All of these ideas of balancing these multiple identities stems from this idea of the double consciousness. So if you haven't already, make your way over to Google Classroom and read about the Harlem Renaissance on page 26 and 27. Then make sure you write your response to the following question. What did the Harlem Renaissance do for African Americans? And how has it influenced the world then and now? Up next, we're going to wrap this up with postmodernism. I'll see you then. Peace.